Welcome back to our channel for Sherlock Holmes series written by author Conan Doyle, The Adventure of Veiled Lodger. One afternoon in 1896, I received a hurried note from my friend Sherlock Holmes. He asked me to come to his residence immediately. I found Holmes seated in his favorite armchair in conversation with an elderly, motherly lady seated right across him. Watson, this is Mrs. Merillo of South Brixton. Holmes introduced the lady with a casual wave of his hand. She has an extremely interesting story to tell us, he added, and then addressed her. You must understand, Mrs. Merillo, that I would prefer to have a witness should I decide to visit Mrs. Ronder. You must make sure to make her understand this prior to our arrival. God bless you, Mr. Holmes, Mrs. Merillo said gratefully. I must confess that she is pretty anxious to see you. Well, we shall arrive early in the afternoon then, Holmes stated. Let us now place all the facts before us. You have stated that Mrs. Ronder has been your lodger for a period of approximately 7 years, yet you have seen her face only once. And I wish that I hadn't, she exclaimed. Her face, I'm given to understand, was badly injured, Holmes remarked. Well, Mr. Holmes, Mrs. Merillo shuddered and explained to say that it was a face at all would be an understatement. In fact, it looked like a face. Our milkman had a fleeting glimpse of it once as she peeped out of an upper story window. It was such a horrible sight that he dropped the tin that he was carrying, and there was milk all over the front garden. Now you can well imagine the kind of face she possesses and the effect it has on other people. Have you seen her face? Holmes inquired. I saw it only once, and it was by accident, our visitor replied. She was quick enough to cover it up immediately, though, and then she said, Now you know why I never raise my veil, Mrs. Merillo. At last you know. Are you aware about her history? Holmes inquired. Anything? No, Mrs. Merillo replied with a shake of her head. Nothing at all. But didn't she provide any references when she arrived? No, sir, Mrs. Merillo replied. But what she did provide was lots of hard cash. She also had no problems with any of my terms. Those were hard times, sir, and a poor woman like me could not afford to refuse such a chance. Did she offer an explanation as to why she chose your house? Holmes probed. No, sir, our visitor replied. But because it is situated well behind the road, it is more private than most houses in the locality. Also, I do not have any family of my own. I suspect that she had tried the other houses and chose my house after taking all these factors into consideration. My house suited her best as she was looking for privacy, which she was ready to pay for. It's quite a remarkable story, Mrs. Merillo, Holmes exclaimed. I'm sure you want an examination of the same. No, Mr. Holmes, she replied. I don't. I have no problems as long as I get my rent on time. I'm very happy with my lodger as she causes no disturbance and gives me little trouble. In fact, she is my best lodger so far. What has become the problem then? Holmes demanded. Her health seems to be the problem, Mr. Holmes, Mrs. Merillo explained. It appears that the woman is dying. There's also something horrible that is going through her mind. Murder, she cries frequently in the night. Once I heard her scream, You cruel beast, you monster. This was very late into the night, and it was so loud that the sound echoed throughout the house. So I decided to see her about it in the morning. I told Mrs. Ronder that if there was someone or something that was bothering her, she could always go to the priest or to the police. Surely between them, she would get the help that she needed. No, Mrs. Ronder had exclaimed. Not the police. The priest cannot change the events of the past either, but then again, my mind would be eased if at least someone knew the truth before my death. There is this great detective man that I know, I informed Mrs. Ronder instantly. Mrs. Merillo continued. This suggestion seemed to excite Mrs. Ronder. That's the man I need, she exclaimed immediately. Why did I not think of it myself? She exclaimed. Please bring him here, Mrs. Merillo, and if he refuses to come, tell him that I am Ronder's widow. Mention Ronder's Wild Beast show. If he is the very man that I think he is, that should bring him here, Mrs. Merillo concluded. It will indeed, Holmes stated. Very good, Mrs. Merillo. You can expect us at your residence in Brixton at about 3 o'clock. Our visitor said goodbye, and no sooner had she left than Sherlock Holmes began to rummage through the pile of books lying in the corner of the room. A few minutes later, he got the book that he specifically needed, as a grunt of satisfaction revealed. The case worried me when it had taken place, Watson, Holmes informed him. I have discovered the notes that I had taken at the time to prove it. But even then, I must admit that I could not make head or tail of it. But still, I was convinced that the judge was wrong in the decision. Don't you recollect the Abbas Parva tragedy at all, Watson? Not at all, Holmes, I confessed. Can you please provide me the points? I requested. That is not a problem at all, my friend replied. You see, Ronder was a well-known man by name. He was also the rival of both Wormwell and Sanger. Ronder was also one of the greatest showmen of his age, but evidence is suggestive of the fact that Ronder took a drink and that both he and his show were suffering considerably on account of his alcohol addiction. This is precisely when the tragedy took place. The caravan had halted at Abbas Parva, a small village in Berkshire. When this terrible incident occurred, the party was travelling to Wimbledon by road and had decided to camp at this small village for the night. Among their many exhibits up on offer for public display, the most splendid was arguably Sahara King, an extremely fine North African lion. It was habit of both Ronder and his wife to display the exhibition to the crowd from within Sahara King's cage. Here, Watson, Holmes said as he handed me a faded photograph. This is a photograph of lion's performance. Notice that Ronder was a huge man and that his wife was a stunning woman. We all know the lions are very dangerous animal, but it was said that Ronder and his wife handled the lion extremely well. It was normal practice for either Ronder or his wife to feed the lion, and they took turns to feed Sahara King. There were times when they both went to feed the lion, but under no circumstances did they allow anyone else to do it. There was logic behind this, of course, as Ronder and his wife believed that as long as they fed the lion, he would consider them as his benefactors and food providers, thus he would never attack them. But everything went wrong on this particular night 7 years ago. Both Ronder and his wife decided to go and feed the lion together, and a terrible tragedy followed. The details of this tragedy have never been revealed clearly. What happened? I asked eagerly. From the accounts received, the entire camp was roused at around midnight by the terrible screams of the women and furious roars of the lion. The people rushed out of their tents immediately, carrying lanterns in the dark. Thanks to this light, they witnessed gruesome sight. Rhonda lay on the ground, about 10 yards from the open cage, with the back of his head crushed to pulp. There was deep claw marks that ran right across his scalp. Near the door of the cage, Mrs. Rhonda lay on her back, even as the lion squatted on her body and roared. The lion had ripped apart her face so violently that no one had imagined that she would actually survive to tell the tale. Many of the circus men, led by Leonardo, the strong man of the party, and Griggs, the clown, collected poles and managed to eventually drive the lion away. The creature leaped back into the cage and the door was locked instantly. But how the lion had managed to get out of the locked cage remained an unsolved mystery. It appeared that Mr. and Mrs. Rhonda had wanted to enter the cage, but the lion had rushed out to attack them as soon as the door had been unlocked. But it was highly uncharacteristic, as it had never happened before. There was something else that was curious. In her extreme moment of pain, Mrs. Rhonda had kept screaming continuously, "Coward! Coward!" even as she was being carried back to her van. It took a full 6 months before Mrs. Rhonda was in the state to give evidence about the incident. The unanimous verdict was that the cause of Rhonda's death was an accident, Holmes concluded and looked at me. "Is there an alternate theory?" I inquired. "It seems conclusive enough." "You could very well say that," Holmes stated. "However, a couple of points still bothered young Edmonds of the Berkshire Constabulary, who was in charge." "What bothered him?" I asked. "Well, actually these points bothered us both," Holmes said. "It was not plausible to reconstruct the incident. Let us examine the affair from the lion's point of view. He is free from the cage. What does he do now? He bounds forward half a dozen steps that bring him to Rhonda. Rhonda turns to flee, and we assume that this is because the claw marks were on the back of his head, and the lion strikes him down to cause his death. But then, surprisingly, instead of bounding forth and escaping, the lion does something strange. He turns and returns to the cage where Mrs. Rhonda is. He knocks her down and tears her face apart by chewing it up. The cries and exclamations from Mrs. Rhonda appear to indicate that her husband is a coward, as he has failed to protect her from the lion. But that is clearly not the case, as Rhonda was dead before the lion reached Mrs. Rhonda's. So how could a dead man have saved his wife from the lion?" Holmes questioned me and I had no answer. "Do you see the difficulty of the case, Watson?" he asked, and I nodded. It was extremely strange indeed. "Another thing was puzzling," Holmes continued. "Evidence indicated that a man shouted in terror just as the lion roared furiously, and when the women's screams were heard." "That was Rhonda, no doubt," I offered, but Holmes shook his head. If Rhonda's skull had been smashed like that, there was no doubt at all that he was dead instantly. 2 witnesses swore that they heard a man scream just when the woman was screaming as the lion attacked her. Also consider the fact that both Rhonda and his wife were at a distance of almost 10 paces from the cage. How on earth did the lion get loose then? "Perhaps an enemy unlocked the door of the cage," I offered. "But it does not seem logical that a lion that had been tamed by Rhonda and his wife should attack them so brutally," Holmes stated convincingly. "This same lion played with them inside the cage and performed tricks with them. Why should he attack them so brutally?" "Maybe this enemy had done something to the lion that made the beast angry," I suggested, but Holmes still did not look convinced. He seemed to be in deep thought now and was completely silent for a few minutes. Then he broke his silence. All that can be said about your theory, Watson, is that Ronder had many enemies and Edmonds had informed me that he was not a popular man. He was a big bully and cursed everyone. But mere speculation is a waste of time as facts are needed. Let us go and meet our client. When we reached, Mrs. Merillo was waiting for us. She escorted us up the shabbily carpeted staircase to the room of the mysterious lodger. The woman sat in a broken armchair in dark corner of small musty, ill-ventilated room. The thick, dark veil that obscured her face ended close to her upper lip to reveal a beautifully formed mouth and delicately rounded chin. As her pleasant voice suggested, she must have been an enigmatic woman once. "You are no stranger to my name, Mr. Holmes," she said. "I thought that might bring you here." "Yes, madam," Holmes replied, "but I am unaware how you know that I am interested in your case." "I knew about it from the county detective, Mr. Edmonds, after regaining my health," she replied. "I am afraid I lied to Mr. Edmonds. Maybe it would have been wiser to tell the truth." "It is normally wiser to do so," Holmes stated. "But why did you lie?" "I did that to save someone, although he was a useless man," she replied. "But I could not allow him to come to any harm as we had been close, very close." "Is this person dead now?" "Yes, sir." "Then what stops you from telling the police all you know?" "I cannot bear the publicity and the scandal that a police examination might bring, Mr. Holmes," she replied. "I do not have much time left, but would like to die peacefully. So I wanted to find a man of judgment and tell him my terrible story. When I am dead, everything shall be revealed, but my troubled mind shall be eased if I tell you everything." "My friend and I would be happy to hear it," Holmes replied. The woman took out a photograph from a drawer. The man in the photograph was a professional acrobat with a fantastic physique. The smile under his heavy mustache was the confident smile of a man who had overcome many battles. "Leonardo," she said. "The strong man who gave evidence." Holmes said, "Yes, and this is my husband." The frightful and ugly face displayed next looked every inch a bully and a rogue. "These two pictures should help you understand, gentlemen," the woman continued. "I was but a poor circus girl doing springs through the hoop before I was 10 years old. This man loved me when I became a woman, and I did not know that it was lust then. As I was unaware of the difference, I became his wife in an evil moment, and my life in hell began." He was the devil himself, and everyone in the show knew about it. But no one could do anything as he was too powerful. He left me for others and beat me with his riding whip when I complained. He went berserk when he was drunk, and even the beasts suffered his madness. When he was hauled up repeatedly for cruelty to animals, he easily escaped by paying the fines as he had lots of money. The show began suffering as the best performers left. It was Leonardo, Jimmy Griggs, the clown, and I who kept the show going. Slowly, Leonardo and I became closer as he seemed to be an angel when compared to my husband. At first, he helped me out of pity, and then it turned into love. I had never experienced such passionate love. I had dreamt of it, but never thought I'd experience it. I suspected my husband knew, but he was a big coward as he was a bully. Probably Leonardo was the one man he was scared of. But my husband tortured me more and more to extract his revenge, and my cries brought Leonardo to the door of our van each night. One day we arrived at a decision. Ronder must die. Leonardo was a clever man and planned everything. I helped him. He fashioned a club and attached 5 long steel nails in the leaden head. The points faced outwards just like a lion's paw, and this was supposed to kill my husband with a death blow and put the blame on the lion. It was very dark when my husband and I went to feed the lion, and we carried the raw meat in a zinc pail. Leonardo waited at the corner of the big van we were supposed to pass. But he was too slow, and before he could react, we had passed him. But he followed us quietly and brought down the club on my husband's head. My heart jumped with joy at the sound of the club smashing against my husband's skull. I ran forward to unlock the lion's gate immediately, but the unthinkable happened. The great beast had smelled human blood, and scent excited him. It bounded out that was upon me instantly. Leonardo could have saved me if he wanted to, as he was armed with the club. One blow of the club would have pushed back the lion, but he lost his nerve and screamed in terror. I saw him turn and run. Then I felt the lion's teeth on my face. Its hot, filthy breath numbed me, and I hardly felt any pain. I tried to push away the blood-stained jaws from me as I screamed in terror. I was conscious and aware that help had arrived. My last memory for many months was being dragged away from the jaws of the beast. Mr. Holmes, when I had recovered, I cursed the lion after seeing my face in the mirror. I cursed him not for taking away my beauty, but for not having killed me. My only wish was to cover my face or whatever was left of it so that no one could see it, and that I should live where no one who knew me could find me. That was the death of Eugenia Ronder. There was a stony silence after the sad woman had finished her story. Then Holmes reached out to pat her hand. Poor woman, the ways of fate are indeed difficult to grasp. But what became of Leonardo, he asked. I never saw him or heard from him after that. Eugenia Ronder replied, Maybe I have been wrong to judge him so bitterly. But he completely abandoned me. But women's love is not so easily set aside. I could not bring myself to tell the truth and expose him to the gallows. Even though he left me at the mercy of the beast's claw, I have stood between him and his fate all these years. He is dead? Holmes asked. Yes, he drowned last month. While bathing at Margate, I saw it in the papers, she replied. Where is Leonardo's 5-clawed club? I don't know, Mr. Holmes. Well, that's of no use now, Holmes stated. The case is closed. Yes, said the woman. The case is closed. We had risen to leave, but something in the woman's tone made Holmes stop. Your life is not your own, he said, turning towards her. Don't take it in your hands. It has no use now, the woman replied. Don't be so sure, Holmes stated. Patient suffering can teach the most important lesson to an impatient world. The woman's reply would shock the bravest of men. She raised her veil and stepped forward into the light. I wonder if you could bear it, she stated. It was the most horrible thing I have ever witnessed. No words can describe a face when there is none. Two bright, beautiful brown eyes stared at us from that utter devastation. Holmes put up his hand as a gesture of both pity and protest, and we exited the room together. I visited my friend 2 days later, and he indicated proudly towards a small blue bottle upon his fireplace. I inspected it to spot a red poison label. I opened it to smell a pleasant almondy odor. Prussic acid, I said. Precisely, my dear Watson, Holmes replied. It arrived by post with a message that said, I send you my temptation as I shall follow your advice. I do believe, Watson, that we can guess the name of brave woman who has sent it.